So I don't want to get into it. I just Christianity rubbed me the wrong way when I was trying to be Christian, and so does Islam. I'm just a hippie. I'm a hippie Muslim. That's it.
Why don't you go freelance? I mean, why did you have to be a particular label group? You know what I mean? Why can't you be just Lindsay? Be the God believer.
I only heard half. Oh,
Ooh, what's going on in the back there, Lindsay? It sounded like Jesus Freak doing like a 360 on a motorcycle. Jeez.
I live by one of the main drags in Red Deer, and we have no noise bylaw here for vehicles.
That must mean something different in Canada, because when you say that in New York, that totally means something different.
What does it mean?
I don't want to say. It might pollute your mind, Lindsay.
Okay. The main street, one of the main streets. People go down it. That's what I meant.
No, I mean, if you don't want to get into it, I respect that. I respect that.
No, we can get into it.
All right. So, what was it about Christianity that rubbed you the wrong way then?
Well, it's pretty much the same thing with Islam. It's just like with Islam, it just feels better in the heart than Christianity felt in the heart.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
But I don't like how God doesn't like homos.
God doesn't
So
like what?
homosexuals.
Oh, okay. And what does the Bible say? Well, I'll take that back. I know the New Testament is strongly against homosexuality, but what about the Old Testament?
Oh, we have a bunch now. Hello.
Hello, Loretta.
Hi.
Well, I don't. Well, the examples we have for homosexuality in the Old Testament is Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19. But I've been talking to my past minister. I don't know what he is. He's a pastor or minister, but he's a homosexual, and he's a minister. So he's a minister with the United Church of Canada. And I had a discussion with him about Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said to me, well, it's more or less not about homosexuality, but more about rape. And
Well, I hate
like
to
that.
break it to both of you, but it has nothing to do with either one of those things.
Okay, what's about then?
Sodom and Gomorrah is about basically rich fucks who didn't care about the widow, the poor, the stranger, you know, that sort of deal. It says so right in the text if you actually read it. They didn't care for the stranger, the foreigner, the sojourner. They didn't care about the poor, um, the downtrodden.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast if you read it in the context of the episode that happens right before um, Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, it's like the episode with Abraham and the angels that show up, right? And Abraham, without question, invites them into the tent and gives them food and it doesn't even question them, doesn't harm them or anything. And so there's that, right? He's caring about people who are strangers. But then when they go down to Sodom and Gomorrah, it's a completely different scenario, right? They're either walking into a place where they're being accosted by all these different people, and they're not being taken in without question, and the only person that invites them in is Lot, right? So if you look at it in that context, it really is a whole allegory on, you know, on caring for the neighbor or not caring for the neighbor, if you will.
Right. Gotcha. I haven't read the Old Testament in over 10 years, so it's a little rusty to me. I guess I should show up to the Noahide Nexus of Noah's Nest or whatever. I should show up to that and brush up on my Old Testament Torah.
All right, we fixed that issue with that particular part. So what else is you got on your mind, Lindsay? Oh, hey, Kevin. Here's the star of the show now. Welcome.
Yes, the star of the show has come.
I wouldn't say I'm a star, but...
You're the star.
Okay. If you say so. It was my birthday on Sunday.
Whoop, whoop.
Yep. 31. I'm over the little hill. So, got the big
Really?
hill in, 20 years.
31? I
Yeah.
thought you were closer to my age.
Nope.
Well, you look quite good for 31.
Well,
Good
thank you.
job.
Apparently that Microsoft website that's supposed to guess your age doesn't agree with you. It seems to think that I'm 45 with all my facial hair. To get to even close to my age, I had to show old pictures of me with really short hair and I'm completely baby-faced. And even then, it was off by about 5 or 6 years.
It thinks I'm 12, so you got that going for you at least.
I don't know, maybe.
I'm 65, if that makes you feel any better.
I don't care. It's just funny, using an algorithm to guess age. It's one of the most non-specific things when you get down to it. So how's everything been going with everybody?
Oh, good. J-Dub's just grilling me on my what path I should be following. And I saw your Athena statue thing that you got. It was Athena, right?
Yeah.
It was very nice, your little shrine.
Yeah, it's one of many. It's actually up top right here on the shelf. So, yeah, it's been some work. It's taken a couple of months, a little bit of collection, but most of it's been over the last few years. But tablecloths and pieces of decoration, getting different odds and ends at thrift stores, bargain stores in general has helped. So I've been able to save up money to buy statuary and some of the other things, and it's nice. And it helps to really maintain the space, and also encourages me, not be a slob. keep my room in tip-top shape, though. I need to make my bed. Didn't do it today. I've had a very busy week. What's up? There's echo.
You have something against slobs there, Kevin?
What's up?
It said that you have a problem against slobs.
Oh.
I was trying to be a little humorous, but I guess not. None of mine.
Something against Slavs?
Slobs. You said you try, so you keep the place clean so you don't be a slob. What's wrong about being a slob?
Slob.
Is it slob or sloth? Yeah, my mom calls me a slob all the time.
Gotcha.
My apartment, actually, up until quite recently, was pretty much a disaster. I could not get it cleaned until I actually decided to make the cleaning part of my spiritual practice.
Yeah.
J-Dubs, if you must know, I am struggling with my iman right now, my faith in Islam, because I really just don't give a fuck for half of the rules. So, yeah. Oh, and I really don't like the backbiting that goes on in my city. Because the imam was all nice to me, and then I think he talked to some of the people around the masjid about me, and now he doesn't talk to me. Which is unfortunate, because I really wanted to learn a few things. But that's alright.
You know what you should do? Get like a cup of pig's blood and like throw it on his car.
I don't know which cab car is his.
And I don't think he's like some kind of, werewolf who can tell what kind of blood it is by smelling it.
I don't think he's Carrie either.
There's that too.
That's also me.
Try just mixing up some corn syrup and red food coloring. Throw that on his car. Let it attract the yellow jackets.
I would have to do it as a non-Muslim, like without headscarf, because they have cameras up. I'm only wearing headscarf part-time anyways, so, because my mom said she wouldn't talk to me if I wore hijab. So, yeah. But I don't know, like, Colin, what drove you away from Islam? I always wondered why you left.
How much time do we have tonight? No, sorry. That's a complicated answer. It took about 2 years for me to go kicking and screaming out of the exit door. I mean, I certainly didn't wake up one morning and go, well, this has been fun. Time to go. I mean, it took a long time. I think a lot of it it ended up ironically being some of the same things that I found problematic with Orthodox Christianity. Reliability of the text, so textual transmission, historicity of certain things, theological dogmas that I felt were really unwavering and not a lot of room for reinterpretation, at least in the present moment in time. Yeah, I know. I mean, each one of those we could have a full-blown conversation about. But I think it was also just my growing evolution towards a more universalist outlook. So really, it got to the point where I really didn't care about labels anymore. And I didn't really think that one had to belong to the quote-unquote true religion in order to be saved. I didn't think that was really necessary. So, yeah. I started to approach things very much from a more universalist perspective after a while, which I thought was at odds with Orthodox Sunni Islam.
No, I see. Well, I've been talking to someone about it. He says to me that I shouldn't follow hadiths because they're like bad rumors. And I remember Kim Tunisia said that to me. I don't like following hadiths because they contradict the Quran a lot. And I really like the Quran, but I've only read it in English. I have not read it in Arabic because I don't know Arabic. But people that have read Arabic who are not Muslims have told me that it says entirely different things. than what it says in English. So, but there are some things in the Quran that I don't accept. So I guess I'm never going to be a true Muslim.
Well, I guess that begs the question of what is a true Muslim? What does that even mean? And I think that that's sort of I think that's a very fundamental issue that's going on within modern 21st century Islam right now. I think is this question of what does that even mean? Who owns the definition of that? Right? Because I think even when I was a Muslim, I typically approached what is Muslim and Islam mean from more of a Muhammad Assad perspective. You know, Muhammad Assad was very liberal when it came to his commentary and his views on the Quran and on the religion, which is kind of it's weird because I guess back in the day he was like the poster child for like Saudi Arabia. Like, you know, he converted when he went. It's like, you know, he went on Hajj and all these things. He was a Jew, you know, who had survived the Holocaust, and then he converted to Islam, and you know, but he did this really awesome commentary on the Quran, which is actually very liberal in comparison to other commentators. And when he translates Islam, he always translates it as surrender, and Muslim as just believer. And then in his commentary, he just says, well, what does this even mean? Well, someone who surrenders to the divine truth. And I think he was more of a universalist than more fundamentalist Muslims usually are. So, you know, I remember even when I was a professing Muslim, I was much more liberal about some of these things than I think some of, you know, more fundamentalist counterparts would approach the same subject.
I just wish that I could take stuff from Christianity, take stuff from Judaism, and take stuff from Islam, but take from other faiths too, and just call myself multi-faith. But it just doesn't sit right in the heart. I already know I'm going to hell. Like, I shouldn't say that because God's the only judge. But according to what is haram and what is halal, I drift more into the haram than anything. So I just figured that I'll probably go to hell. But in Islam, hell's not eternal. So, but I don't even believe, half of me don't even believe in heaven or hell because no one knows what's at the end until you die. And the chances are is that you go through a major high in your brain, right? Or is those hippies just telling me lies?
Well, I would say that you know, the question of again, heaven or hell from an Islamic perspective, I mean, again, that's also a very complicated thing. I mean, there are plenty of philosophical Muslims and Sufi mystics that, and again, Muhammad Assad said the same thing, that you can't that the images depicted of the afterlife in the Quran about heaven and hell don't even scratch the surface. In other words, really those are just images to get a message across. But essentially, the metaphysical reality of the afterlife is so beyond our understanding that even the words can't even convey what that state of being is going to be like. So,
there's this thing that Abrahamic religions seem to forget that exists in religions. It's called mythology. There you go. That's what that shit is. Layered symbolisms. They can be approached from different perspectives. And that is anti-dogmatic by definition.
Yeah, and there's oh, sorry. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Lauren.
Coming into, now I forgot what I was, Kevin said mythology. Coming into, especially the Vedantic tradition, I really wish that I could turn back and approach the Bible as mythology, as mythos. But I mean, I could actually look my Swami in the face, which it wouldn't be true, so I'm not going to, but I could tell him I don't believe that there was ever a historical Krishna, and he'd be okay with it. You know, but I think being able, you know, when you've been taught that your scriptures are literally true, it really makes it difficult to find any deeper meaning in it. So people do seem to manage, but I personally, as an ex-Christian, I can't. I mean, you know, it's only been within the last few months that I've gotten over being an angry ex-Christian. So, being able to approach it as mythology, you can add it. You know, I mean, I don't need for. I think there probably was a historical Krishna, but I don't need for there to have been one to believe that the Bhagavad Gita was divinely inspired.
Absolutely, and that's sort of reiterating and reinforcing what I was saying before. I find it interesting, whether directly or ostensibly, a lot of historians, post-Christian historians, even leading into, you know, this last century, have used the term mythology as an insult, basically using it as a synonymous term for fake or false. Without even looking at just the root definition. Mythologia, meaning the study of stories. All it means. And in these older traditions, these older pre-Christian traditions, stories were multiple. So there were different poets, different bards, whatever particular cultural trapping you could use as a lens for this. There were different poets who were writing different kinds of stories to describe the same kinds of cultural contexts, the same doctrines, the same sort of wisdoms that were being carried forth by that particular culture. And they were just different expressions of many of the same core structures of ritual, core structures of theology, and things like this. And philosophia is, you know, the study of wisdom, really. And that is where people examine it in more detail. So oftentimes when there's these sorts of conversations where people are like, well, here's these literal truths and this is why, I always come back to this idea that, well, if you want to discuss the idea of truths or truisms, that is the realm of philosophy, but it is not inherently the realm of religion when you look at it from a historical perspective of what a mythos was to a specific culture.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of examples of a more symbolic, mystical tradition that's it's actually in all three Abrahamic faiths. It's just that they're not the loudest, most angry voices right now, and they're not featured on Fox News very often, you know? So you're not going to have very many representatives of these particular groups. But I would say that the most loudest voices right now in the, I guess, you know, religion debate or religion discussion, the loudest voices aren't really representative, I think, of many of us in this particular chat room right now. I mean, they're either a very reductionist, materialistic perspective that just reduces everything to just pure fiction or delusion. The other side, the other loud voice, are the very fundy, literalist, dogmatic people, and they're excellent opponents for each other, but the ones that get left out of the loop are the more psychosymbolic, non-literal, non-dogmatic folks. There's not really a loud voice, especially in the mainstream media right now, to represent that third perspective.
These absolutisms, these extremisms, could be viewed, at least at the very least, as being masochistic and ultimately being self-defeating. But the looking at things from, if not full-on a mystical perspective, at least from a more symbolic and cultural perspective, it's work. It's more complicated. It's easier to take a particular side, even if that side is very narrow, even if that side is not even all that well supported. If you have other people behind you that are saying pretty much the same thing, But few of these people step outside of that, step outside of their perspective and look, well, there's all these different extremists, many of which are saying similar things to me, but we're all fighting over the same thing. There are very fundamentalist type Christians of multiple different denominations. They're all speaking very loudly, saying virtually the same thing, but fighting over, not over just over people that are not what they are, but other Christians, using Christians as the sort of core example of this. And that is something that people get roped into, oftentimes from their family environment or from their culture or where they live. And you know, it's definitely reasonable to be angry at them, to be frustrated with that kind of behavior. But when you look at it, a lot of these people, I don't want to say it necessarily like this, but for lack of a better word, they don't know any better. A lot of people really very much are in ignorance of the other things that are out there. And they become so convinced that that's all that's available, they know nothing else. I mean, it's almost like, to use this analogy, if you've ever been out on the open ocean for quite a while, you've been on a cruise ship or you've been out on a boat, and then you finally get onto dry land, you're still rocking because you're so accustomed to the tumultuous nature of being out on the water. And it takes time for people to adjust to that. And some people, to use the example of sort of like the sailor or the pirate who's constantly going out into the ocean, they always have sea legs, but they never totally adapt to dry land. And I think in some ways, religious extremism is sort of like that. They're that way so long that there's nothing else that they can ever feel comfortable with, and they can't overcome what it would take to see an outside perspective, even if it's just a lateral move into something more symbolic and less extreme.
I don't think I'll ever watch Pirates of the Caribbean the same way ever again. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome, sir. I'm full of really strange analogies that seem to not make sense.
Oh, they make sense.
I thought it made sense. What I find, and I'm not sure how true it is with Islam, although I know that Islam generally is not a fan of religious art. What I see in a lot of, especially the fundamentalist Christians, is they cannot seem to wrap their mind around the idea of symbolism. I mean, I got into it pretty bad once in a hangout a few months ago with a fundamentalist Christian who thinks that I worship a literal woman with 6 arms with severed heads in her hands. I mean, you know, so, you know, they just can't get their minds around the idea that, you know, the symbolism and the mythology is representations of natural forces and cosmic principles. And I really don't understand the need to believe that it's literally true. It just... it seems counterproductive. I mean, even from an evolutionary standpoint, if you're not willing to be flexible in your thinking, and a new kind of predator moves into the area. You know, just from that perspective, I really don't understand that need for that kind of rigidity of thinking and that kind of close-mindedness.
Well, I think there's a sort of history behind this, and it's something I've sort of mentioned before, but in this particular avenue, I think it's even more useful to elucidate. When you look at the, if you look at what came before Christianity and Islam, in particular, but also other more mystical, heterodoxic, Gnostic traditions that came out of the same period. It's a term that I've commonly used. It's used to refer to the Roman or post-Roman period, the Hellenistic period. A lot of what was going on at the time involved foreign cults. So you had Romans worshiping Mithras and Isis, for for instance. You had people engaging in what would be often called magic, coming from a term to describe more Near Eastern and even full-on Persian people, who the magi, the sort of wise men. So there's a lot of a propensity in the Mediterranean, and particularly among the Greeks and Romans, the sort of Greco-Roman Hellenistic culture, to take upon these different ideas. And there's a term that we use in modern English, eclecticism, eclecticismos, which is largely used by the Greeks to refer to the largely Roman or Greco-Roman Hellenistic view of people taking upon the trappings, the cultural trappings of certain mythologies of other cultures in a very dressing sort of way, a drapery, as a topical and not very thorough or substantive representation. In other words, shallow. A shallow view of the actual cultures to which they were incorporating. In the same sense that, Mithras had a specific role in pre-Zoroastrian Persian religion, but as he was adapted into a sort of Roman cult, he took on a completely different form that largely is a departure from Avestan concepts of the Mithras figure. Same with Sibyl, Isis, and many of the syncretic deities at the time. And Christianity and Islam were developing out of this same period, and largely can be viewed as syncretic. Greco-Roman, somewhat to certain extents Egyptian, or at the very least Coptic, Syrian, and Judaic, most definitely. And as these religions have progressed over time, they become less of the sort of mythology that we were mentioning, culturally specific layered symbolism that are transmitted generally orally or eventually written down by specific poets, having different manifestations and different cultists depending on which area of a certain culture or region within a certain culture that you're speaking of. They become more and more distant from the host cultures in which they come from, to such an extent when you get to medieval Christianity, using a corpus that had been translated from its original language, from language to language to language to language, 5, 6, 7 different times, and retransmitted and reinterpreted multiple times, and carrying along some of the older ideas of the original sort of Jewish mysticisms that sort of a lot of Christianity and Islam came out of. But not only losing that because of language and the passage of time, but losing it even more so because they were taking upon other cultural trappings. The Catholic Church, or at the very least the original sort of Christian Church, was trying to convert people, particularly in Europe. So they took upon Celtic and Germanic folklore as a means to get people into churches and to get them to convert. So it becomes watered down significantly. So it's very easy to view this sort of eclecticism, if you view it as such, to be viewed as literally, because it's so far removed from its original state as a mythology. It's very difficult to actually get people to look at it as such, because it's just completely divorced from what it was originally. And now, what, a good 2,000 years, maybe 2,200 years from its original state? So to me, it's really no surprise when you get down to the nitty-gritty of the history behind it and how it developed.
But yeah, Lindsay, I would say that there are a number of traditions within Islam, and also throwing Christianity, and I've sort of said this earlier, that certainly took a more mystical, non-literal approach to the religion. The problem is like with any organized group, you have to sort of see what's the majority right now, and who are the loudest people right now in the global community. They're expressing their perspective, and before I left Islam, there were a number of sub-traditions within that I was very much attracted to. But the thing is, I also enjoy community. And what I discovered is that my views, there was no community of Muslims in my area that shared my particular minority, very minority view of the religion. Maybe Muslims one-on-one, like I could get them one-on-one as, you know, with some of my good friends, and we would agree on certain things. But like as a community, I found that I just there was no community for me, and that was I think another huge reason why I ended up leaving. Is because I was faced with this reality is like, okay, either I find a group of people that are really into like Ibn Arabi and Averroes and Ibn Hazm, you know, either I find a group of Muslims that fit that description, or I build a time machine and I go back to, well, maybe I shouldn't do that, but you know, it was very much like realizing that I was so far removed from the general community that it was just immensely awkward to still be saying that I was a member of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's really hard to like have no community. I strive for community, but I'm so eccentric is the good word for weird, right? that that in my thinking, I don't know, is completely rational. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna like go with the flow and see how the summer goes. And if I leave Islam again, then I'm not gonna go back to it because this is the round two. And if it doesn't feel right after I do my nerding up in the summer that I usually do, like I can't even fast Ramadan again because I've never fasted Ramadan because I take medication and my doctor just increased my meds without even telling me today. How nice of him. So now I take it all day long. So I won't be able to fast. And you know, Muslims look at you like you're a piece of garbage when they find out that you're not fasting. And there's lots of judgment in Islam, and there's not supposed to be, but there is.
Can I tell you a story about that particular thing that you talked about? It's an allegory. It probably just kind of helps it out. These are one of my Sufi stories. Basically, there was an old, you know, like a fakir, you know, like a person of wisdom, but this person was, you know, poor like a beggar, but, you know, and during Ramadan, and this was during the summer, you know, and people get really hungry during that time, especially summertime, it gets really bad. So what he did was, this fakir, he goes on top of this wall and starts eating this big, juicy burger right in front of everyone, where they were like starving. And they got so upset with him that they actually pulled him off from the wall and started beating the crap out of him. And then they're beating him up, but the fakir was right there watching them. And what was happening is that they were actually fighting amongst themselves. So that's the story about my fasting story.
That's very nice, Frank. And you have such a nice
you.
smile when you said it.
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of stories like that. These limericks or whatever they are. So it's there's a lot. I have like a whole volume case of them. Some of them are hilarious, but it's pretty cool. You get to learn things with these things. And fasting is not just about fasting from food. It's, you know, fasting from the eyes, fasting from the ears. There's levels of fasting. It's not just you not putting food into your mouth.
I know.
Yeah, it's
Most
much
people
more
forget
important
that you have to fast from swearing, not having sex with your partner, and lying, all those things.
I am thinking right now that I will be doing good to keep vegetarian during Navaratri this fall.
Okay, it's good. It's just you had the mic open. I was trying to get your attention. Interesting thing about adherence to certain practices within a religious tradition is oftentimes when you look at different cultures, they were adapted by different cults within the larger religious tradition, and oftentimes they were chosen, they were elected um, by certain individuals. A lot of times there wasn't a compulsion to do so. It would be actively encouraged in a lot of cases, but individuals would choose to engage in certain practices as a means to grow closer to whatever specific cult that they were engaged upon, whether it was an initiatory tradition or a specific temple that they frequented or worked at or made offerings to, in different levels, much in the way of what Green Soul is saying, what Frank is saying. There's different levels, not just levels in a sort of linear fashion of different levels of intensity in which you can fast. And from on one end, just fasting from one food product to fasting from all meat to fasting from all food to full on being totally in complete sensory deprivation, complete isolation from other people. But also there are levels of the engagement of that practice. There are group practices where people engage in these sorts of things for the purposes of a specific ritual contexts, for the purposes of a specific festival or holiday, or for more personal reasons. A lot of people in ancient Greece, for instance, would become abstinent from sex, particularly women if they were devotees of Artemis, as a personal reflection of that, of their devotion to Artemis specifically. But there were also many rituals where it was required, if you were to engage in them, that you were to have been abstinent, that you would not have had any sexual interaction before a particular festival, particularly if you were a temple devotee. So I think it just varies by culture to culture.
Sorry, Frank, for breaking up, and sorry for your bad connection. I have really slow connection too. I think it's
I have a
mostly
really.
plus.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'm sure what you said was very valuable. I hope I can hear it again one day, or maybe now. Who knows?
I don't know. I obviously already forgot what I said, so
Yeah, I get that too.
my memory. Oh well. Moving on.
All done in perfection. It was meant to happen. There you go. So how's everybody doing?
I'm doing real well. I had a rather busy weekend, and a lot of stuff happened. I was going to tell you about it a while ago, but you were very busy with family and everything. Totally understandable. And it's fairly early, I think, last time I spoke with you.
Yeah, I've been very busy with a lot of, but it comes and goes. But just really quickly, I live near like the Sheraton Hotel, and this place is huge. They have this elevator that just goes up and up, and you can see everything. You can see the skyline. And I took my kids there. I said, let's go to this, because I've been living in this hotel, like near this hotel, for like 3 years. And I could tell you, my kids are really brave, because they go to this elevator, they're just like laughing and everything. I'm like holding on to the elevator for like Your light bubbles going up. Yeah, that's my little thing that happened today. But yeah, it was holding with the family. It was fun. It was good.
Everything's okay though.
Everything's always there's always issues, of course. You know, you kind of deal with them, but you
Sure.
know, I'm very grateful. Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah. Gotta get ready for the holidays too. This time of year, it gets extremely busy.
Definitely.
So. Oh, it does. What's going on? Thought you were mad at me for some reason. Are you not talking?
How can I ever be mad at you, Frank?
Because I called you Cupcake? I was like, oh, I think you took that to offense.
Hey, it's one of the nicest names anyone ever
Sorry.
called me, so.
Oh, so bad.
Well, at least he didn't call you
I'm actually.
a Danish.
Oh, no,
So-
we were talking. English. No, man. It's not the same. It's not the same.
J-Dub,
I actually had. I don't.
sorry.
Go ahead. You was going to say, Lindsay?
I was just gonna say, J-Dubs said to me that he was offended that I didn't call him Cupcake or Muffin or Sugar Plum or Honey Puff. He's like, how come I never got any of those names? So I think he's inviting
Oh, yeah, I remember.
to names like Cupcake because he knows that there are terms of endearment. Right, J-Dubs?
I don't know, Lindsay. When you actually say muffin, it sounds really nice. It makes me hungry, actually. So, like, I don't eat muffins. But when you call J-Dubs muffins, it's like, it's so cute. Let me stop. I gotta stop. Oh, how you doing, Sarah? Is that your real last name, by the way, Sarah?
It is my real last name.
That is awesome.
I
Sarah.
I tell people all the time that when I was in middle school that I was very thankful my mom didn't give me the middle name Anne because people would call me Saran Wrap. And
Oh, man.
And it literally would have been Sarah Ann Rapp.
So.
Oh, that is an awesome name.
Thank you.
So your dad's side of the family then should totally have a family reunion and make it into a deaf comedy jam.
There you go.
Well, given that I'm estranged from my real father, that would be very difficult.
And do one for yourself. Take it back, you know.
Hey, since this is an interfaith hangout, I actually want to recommend a movie. And I think you will enjoy it. It's called The Life of Pi.
I love that movie, and I love that book.
That movie is... there's a book. Man, I saw that movie 2 days ago. I loved it. It was amazing. Like, I was like, I don't think I want to watch this movie, but let me just give it a shot. You know, I was kind of like hesitant, you know, and I loved it. It was beautiful.
You need to read the book. It is
Movie.
so good.
Wow. So who wrote that book, by the way? I don't know.
Jan Martel.
Oh, it's a famous...
I want to say.
Really? Okay. Great movie, by the way. I definitely would recommend it.
Yeah, it was right. Jan Martel.
Okay. It kind of touches upon faith and different types of faith and you know, atheistic positions and it's weird because it kind of connects them all into that story. it was way. I'm sorry, I'm outside of my porch. It was really well made, and I was really impressed by it. That's basically what I have to say. I don't want to. If somebody didn't watch the movie, I definitely.
I'm still trying to recover from the last movie you recommended to me.
Which one?
Dark City.
Oh, you seen it?
I did. I watched it. Yeah, very good.
What do you think of it? What do you think of it?
Uh,
Good?
it was well done. I'm still, trying to get my bearings on it, to be honest with you, trying to break it down.
Yeah.
It was very umbral. It was very umbral and metropolitan.
Oh, it was Dark City.
Yeah.
The movie. I think I've heard of it. It's basically based on the same premise that The Matrix was based on, but was supposedly a hell of a lot better movie.
Well, before The Matrix came out, that was terrible.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. It's just that I think I've heard of the movie. I should probably search Netflix and see if I can find it, because I think I'd like to see it.
It's not on Netflix.
Oh, well.
You'd probably be able to pick it up on DVD.
Yeah. Maybe I'll check out Amazon, see if I can find it.
Hey, Frank, have you ever read what's-his-face's book, Purifications of the Heart?
That sounds really familiar.
I think some Muslim wrote it. Some Sufi Muslim.
I'm sure. I just need a name.
I think it was Hansa Yusuf, or no, Yusuf Islam. No, it's something like that. Let me look it up.
I'm not a big fan of Imam Ghazali, but yeah, it's just. I'm sure he's really nice. Yeah. But yeah, it sounds very familiar. Yeah, well, we'll see. I went to 2 hangouts before I came here, and both of them were trying to, and I really don't really understand it, or maybe I don't want to understand it because it just, for me, it's just pointless. But a rational argument for the existence of God, I always had a problem with it because I don't know that could really be expressed through words that way, because it seems almost one-dimensional. I think it's more comprehensive.
That's because atheists have one-dimensional thinking about concepts of God and spirituality and mythology. They won't believe that there's any kind of God or any kind of spirituality until there's flying unicorns that shoot rainbows out their asses, and the sky splits open and God's like, hey, what's up? That's what they're looking for. So.
Yeah, but the problem is the thing is the one that that kind of argues with it. It's almost like two people with the same position arguing about the same thing. It's really strange. And I don't know how much more I could actually take of listening to this.
Just
I
disengage.
actually had Matt
Just
Bell
disengage. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Matt Bell just yelled at me and called me all types of names, and I just started laughing.
It's like when somebody sends you a link.
What's the point?
It's like when somebody sends you a link and you already know the website it comes from and you know it's no good. Just ignore the link. It's just not worth it.
I mean, the big question is, Frank,
I don't know how
is there a
much.
day that goes by without, Matt Bell calling someone names? I mean, is that even possible?
I kind of feel honored because, you know, he has not called me a name because I never engaged in them until actually the second time. You know, so it is what it is. But I smiled, and I have a strange feeling that this guy is my age. Why am I getting that? I don't know. I gotta stop. But yeah, I keep hearing this, and I actually I believe this is the Aristotelian. Oh, sorry. Hold on.
Beautiful ringtone.
I like how it has instruments in it.
Okay, I got it. I understand. I have a smartphone and I don't know how to use it. There you go. Yeah. So a lot of these arguments, it's it is what it is. You know, I kind of I don't know how long it's going to last, but maybe it has its purpose. You know, through logic. But when we talk about, you know, religious subjects, I think it's kind of crazy.
As long as there's extremists, they'll keep going. Pretty much, that's their fuel. If there's anybody who deems themselves religious who goes out actively pressing people in the name of religion, atheists will have some kind of fuel. When that falls away, they'll return to their basements.
Or they'll just quietly not believe.
There's the thought, right?
You know what, though? Having been an atheist for a couple of years before I found my way into Hinduism, I have to say I can see their point. Atheists are discriminated against. People, we're talking about a non-religious minority that people trust less than rapists for no good reason. So, yeah, I mean, they do have a legitimate axe to grind. But a lot of them just seem to have to get all up in your face. And I have stopped trying to enter into conversations with them because I actually had the experience of having a douche rocket. I went in to a debate. Basically, I wanted to spectate. I wanted to eat popcorn and play apologetics bingo. And since the one Christian could not seem to be able to debate logically and eventually dropped out, they dragged me in. And so now I've got this guy trying to debate me as though I were a Western monotheist. And it's funny because this past Sunday, our Swami, we have a little informal discussion after satsang, and he had said that when he's talking to atheists, he asks, "What God don't you believe in?" And of course, they describe, your basic Abrahamic God, and he says, "Well, I don't believe in that God either." I don't, and I've actually been told that I can't be taken seriously because I supposedly have so many positions. And the thing is, I don't have a position. I just refuse to debate the issue. I'm just not interested in trying to convince somebody that there's 300 million gods. Figure it out on your own.
A lot of the atheists are the ones that debate. Obviously, we're not speaking of the ones who are just atheists and go about their lives, maybe to discuss it casually or civilly, but the more anti-theist type atheists, they're like that one guy you knew in high school who was really into you and just couldn't take the hint, and every so often he would come back kind of trying to get into your business and asking if he could date you or whatever. And I find that that's the kind of dialogue that I have with atheists as a non-monotheist, as a non-Christian. I explain to them very clearly that not only is what I practice not anything like Christianity, but there are many other religions that are not like, at the very least, the orthodox forms of Christianity, because there's Gnosticism, there's liberal, progressive, and universalist Christianities, absolutely, as there is in Islam, as we've seen. And it seems as if they get the point, but eventually, whether within the same conversation that night or at some point later on when I interact with them again, they bring it up again. Like they just could not get the point. They are so incredibly convinced that I am that girlfriend that really deep down wants to date them, that they just keep at it again. And some people will just never get the point. They have already concluded so firmly and so rigidly that all religion is the cause of all suffering, and that all religions are basically like Christianity. They're all dogmatic. They're all extremely rigid, extremely hierarchical, and extremely literal, that there's no convincing them. So at some point when you see that person, when you get the general scope of that person's viewpoint, just disengage. There's no point in engaging them anymore. It's pointless.
Anyways, totally random, but I'm going, and it was nice chatting to you all. You too, Colin and Frank and J-Dubs and Kevin and Loretta and Smart and Sarah. Have all fancy night. I'm gonna go play video games.
All right.
Okay.
Awesome.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom
What game?
alaikum. Bye.
I think a lot of the problem with the anti-theists actually is that they come from such inflexible monotheistic traditions, namely Christianity. You know, most of the ones you're going to run into in this country. But they take that kind of narrow, rigid thinking with them into atheism. And actually, I cannot remember what blog I was reading, and it actually rang true for me. A lot of the really strong anti-theists treat God like an ex that they're still angry with. And, you know, I don't think they're angry with God. I think they're angry with the structure of the religion that they were brought up in. But they take that narrow-minded, dogmatic, you know, complete black and white thinking with them into atheism. And they're still fundamentalists. They're just fundamentalist atheists now.
Absolutely. And I'll preface this by saying this isn't completely relegated to the militant atheist. I've seen this in almost every single religious convert who usually comes out of a Christian tradition and comes to something else. I've definitely seen it in pagan and polytheistic traditions on my side of the fence. I've seen it in esoteric and Gnostic religions as well, and all sorts of alternative spiritualities that I've studied over the years. But it's particularly prominent among extreme anti-theistic militant atheists because the level, the intensity of their experience of being wounded by it is much, much greater. And yeah, the sort of X description of viewing God as a sort of X definitely rings true with it, because largely it's based on their upbringing and their parents themselves, and they're using religion as the primary source of that sense of a forfeiture of their own control, a sense of betrayal, of their upbringing, not feeling that they could be close to their family because they saw it differently. And that's part of the reason why I mentioned that it can happen in other instances. It can happen in other religions, and it can also happen in other ideologies. It can happen politically. It can happen culturally. It can happen with your chosen vocation. You go different. You go in a different direction than perhaps you were raised in. And I think it takes a lot of time and effort to get over that. I've made this point several times in chat about the baggage that sometimes we carry with us when we choose a different religious tradition. And I think that deconversion from whatever you were before is just as important, if not more so, than converting to a religion that is more consistent with your personal worldview. But I don't feel like a lot of the conversations that do occur are fostering growth and development and a flexible and open dialogue about these religious discussions. And it's a part of the reason why Ruben and I have been having these discussions, have been having this hangout in the first place, so that we can have them and give people a space to discuss from a cross-religious, cross-traditional perspective. And that highlights the piece of advice that I give to an atheist, or even somebody who's spiritual, agnostic, or on the fence, or about atheists. It's best to be patient with them, because a lot of times, if you just come at them with anger, and we've all done it, I've absolutely done it quite a few many times. I've found myself, and I've had to stop myself, getting really aggressive when an anti-theist gets up in my face. But it doesn't help. A lot of the times they're baiting you because they feel hurt, they feel angry for whatever reason, and coming at them with anger is not going to help them. The best thing that you can do is lay out how you see things, establish your boundaries as what your belief is and how it's different than other beliefs or different than an atheistic viewpoint. And if possible, give them resources to look into what you do and to look into other things that exist, and give them a broader perspective about the whole picture of religious traditions going back into antiquity, and allowing them to make their own decision. A lot of that kind of aggressiveness, a lot of that kind of absolutism and extremism, it's brought out of a loss of control. I'm sure you can back me up on this, Frank, that a lot of people, anger comes out of a loss of control. You've gotten to such a point when you feel that there's nothing in your life that you can fix, and you feel that you're completely helpless. So one of the ways we deal with that is lashing out. Not to say that I make it a point to psychoanalyze atheists, and I'm by no means a therapist, but it does seem very evident in the sorts of interactions that typically happen. Case in point, a lot of times when anti-theists realize that they can't debate you with their philosophical techniques, they go to potshots and start trying to attack your character. And that's the very reason right there, and it has to deal with a fundamental insecurity. So they don't need our anger, they need our sympathy and our understanding.
Well, basically they're expressing how they feel, but it really comes down to themselves. It's really, and I posted this thing up, it's not about so much about your beliefs, but it's more about your behavior. And that's basically what I'm seeing. It's not so much as a position of what you think, but how they actually behave and how they react.
Absolutely, and it's a point that I've made very much within the polytheistic Reconstructionist community, in the larger neo-pagan community that I'm a part of, because oftentimes I see these sorts of aggressive, desperate measures being taken towards, particularly Christians, but also among atheists or or even from other more somewhat related alternative religions that ultimately are just laterally different than what we practice, even though there are some distinct differences. And that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help ourselves, but it especially doesn't help the next generation of people who are going to be looking at these sorts of things, who are going to be coming into adult age and want to be able to have these resources to be able to explore these things openly in a civil and welcoming environment. And like Loretto said earlier, they are coming from a very reasonable position. And same thing with people of alternative or more progressive heterodoxic versions of mainstream religions. We are coming from very good positions, and there is reason to feel angry, and you definitely want to be able to defend yourself if you are being personally attacked. But there's a way of going about that, and I think what you're saying, Frank, about behavior is really important, because mindfulness is a very important part of living in the world, but it's especially an important part of religious tradition. And I think it's a sad state of affairs when something so fundamental to a religious mindset is completely avoided in religious discussion. We should know better, but oftentimes we don't, or at least we don't recognize that essential virtue when we discuss it.
Within my tradition, and I'm sure with a lot of traditions, most, I believe, practice is essential, and how you react to things, especially during crisis or stressful situations, really comes down to your practice of spirituality. That's what really helps me. It has its effects on me as far as how I react, and it helped. It does help. I do, and I enjoy it at the same time, because you're developing. I'm not saying that it's all roses all the time, but that's not the point. And in a funny way, I do take like a stoic position on it, but it has become part of my persona, and there's a lot of things that I realize that I need to improve. Basically, be aware of, but it's part of development. It's part of growing up.
I think an important part of good, functioning, flexible, and meaningful, adaptive, pragmatic behavior, whether you're just talking about your daily living or religious living, is ultimately an emergent property of your life. Oftentimes we become so focused on particular goals that we lose sight of the process. And that is always an ongoing and constantly changing, transmogrifying process that is contingent upon various factors at different times and among different people and in different cultures. And there are many different things that interact with it. No matter how much we might want to make something a nice little soundbite, life is complicated. And you constantly have to reassess where you're going with things. And case in point to what you've been saying earlier about focusing on practice from a religious perspective. That's something that I've tried to do within my religious community, is encouraging practice. And one of the things I've been able to do is, put my money where my mouth is. Post links and post pictures and start discussions about things I've been doing to make progressions. I've been developing my sacred spaces, making them much nicer, making them much more orderly, organizing my room and my space, my home as a whole, and the practices that I engage in to make my home a space that is open and ideal for religious and spiritual cultivation. And I found that categorically, when I do that, and not only discuss my own, but give advice and tips and directions to other people who are looking to do very much the same thing, it is always received in a much more positive way, and it causes a lot more development. Whether I'm talking, casual friends or people I've known online and offline for a decade, there's always something that can be benefited from putting ideas to practice and not staying wrapped up in semantic arguments and discussions, even ones that are civil discussions, but are ultimately fruitless because it just stays stuck on words and concepts. Look at the dictionary. Look up any word in a thesaurus. Eventually, it just goes to other words of similar meaning. And a lot of times, discussions become like that. They become like a circular discussion that doesn't really cultivate anything.
I don't know if you heard these type of arguments about why do you need, a spiritual practice or religion or have you? Isn't that something innate within the individual? I thought about, and I'm not particular. I don't remember where I'm hearing the arguments, but I hear this. However, I thought about that, but then I thought about an experience that I had by one of my a friend of mine. He started pouring me drinks, like he poured me soda, and I thought it was the oddest thing to ever see. To actually have a person just serve me, and I didn't get it at first, but I think I started to understand years later what was, the whole thing about serving others. Because, you first come with a selfish attitude, but, this part of growing up. There's actually stages of morality in a sense. Like, kids will sometimes obey their parents because they fear something. They fear punishment. And then later on in life, you do things in order to get reward. But then there's also a stage where actually you do things because they're the right thing to do. You're not expecting the reward, and you don't care so much about the punishment. Psychology actually touches upon this. I forgot the psychologists actually termed those coins, but just the whole point of serving is just amazing. And it's not that innately, I would do good things. It's that I didn't know how to do. I didn't really understand, and I think spiritual practices could actually become very insightful, very introspective, and for me anyway, it had a great benefit in order for me to understand my environment. And when I speak about this to other people, it's very hard to look at their reaction, because it's almost like a reaction of disbelief and non-importance. But later on in life, I learned to accept those type of reactions, and just let it go.
That's a lot of food for thought.
A lot of food.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, the short summary is like, people are good, initially, and whatever that means. But I think most of us, or maybe all of us, just wants to be loved or cared for and want to do good things. But I think people have to be taught. It's not just innate. It's just, and the reason why I think this is how we interact with others. We don't live in an island, and that's what the sense of community is for too. Like I do have a spiritual community, but I have all other types of community. I have a Google Plus community.
Sure.
You know, I have a family community. I have a neighborhood community. You have all types of communities. You know.
Mm. Well, this actually touches on
Yeah.
Something that's also something I've often tried to encourage or demonstrate to people within my own spiritual groups, but also others, particularly one is related, because it's a little easier to get this across. It is definitely wonderful to have a religious life, to have a spiritual life of some sort, something that motivates you, something that is a cultivated practice, that you're actually putting the ideas down into something concrete in some way, and doing it regularly, having a structure of some kind, having a discipline to it, holding yourself to those ethical standards, to those personal standards. But I find that if you only focus on the purely religious or even the full-on esoteric, I particularly see this among mystics. They become so ungrounded by their religious focus, and a lot of their other parts of life often suffer. Sometimes it's actually health. People who just they become so focused on their religious studies and their activities, and some of that has to do with what we were speaking earlier of maybe not really putting something into proper practice and making sense of it. But a lot of times it's just because they become so narrow in focus that often their health suffers. But it's more than that. Having other communities and other ways in which to interact, like you're saying, Google Plus communities, having social groups that are not specifically religious, having hobbies and projects and things that you do around the house, fixing your house, putting a new paint job on the outside of your garage door, making music or drawing or writing. Creativity especially is one of those really good ones that gives you a fuller and more enriched life. And I think that without that life, without that fertility in your activities, I think eventually the religious life is prone to suffer because it doesn't have anything to grow in. So I think it is very, very important to not only put things into practice from a religious perspective, but put those things into practice in every other aspect of your life. But it's unfortunate because when that is brought up in conversation, when it's been discussed, oftentimes people make the assumption that that means inserting religion into things that are not religious. But I think what I mean to say by this is more that it helps you, that the other things that you do in life helps to give you content, helps to give you substance for your religious expression, if that makes sense.
Kevin, why are you speaking of my life?
Speaking of what?
Speaking of my life.
I promise I'm not spying on you.
You better not be from 3,000 miles away.
Reuben, I don't know. That's possible.
Good to know, Reuben. But just kind of building on that, like kind of just all we've been talking about, I've just been processing a lot, which is why I've been so quiet. But it's like I just recently got out of a 2-year relationship with a very, for lack of a better word, a very die-hard atheist, which was okay because, he honestly didn't care that I was Wiccan. He, didn't, or whatever the case may be. But because I only have a select few within my own community that are pagan or that I have that type of connection with, it drives you, and I already have anxiety and depression and everything else, but when you feel secluded from that kind of community, it just drives you down even further to where you almost don't, I want to get up, I want to do a ritual, or I want to, I feel like I need to do a tarot reading, but it's like because I lack that, you almost don't want to go in and do that practice, or you don't want to do that. And then, I have friends and I have, other communities like, Green was talking about, but it's like for me, I feel like because I am so different and because I'm a Wiccan in the Deep South, that's blatantly spread across my forehead, that I have to have all of the guards up because someone will see, someone will know, and then I'm going to have the 20 million questions, or I'm going to have the ones that, because they all like me, because I'm a very sociable person and everything else, they all then immediately go into that mode of, Sarah, you should totally come to church with me. I think you'd really like it. Sarah, you should, we had a really great sermon this weekend. You should come listen. And it just makes me so uncomfortable when they do that, because then it's like, I don't want to go, but then other areas that I'm battling with simultaneously are like, oh no, you can't say no. You have to say yes. You have to say yes, because that's not polite to say no. But it's completely battling all those things on different levels. And I completely admit that right now, like, I haven't worn my pentacle in a week and a half, which is irritating the crap out of me. But at the same time, everything I've done so far, I haven't had a chance to be able to do that, and it's driving me insane. But I've already begun to see, like, now that I'm out of this relationship, I've started reorganizing my apartment and started taking back control of different areas. But that's why I'm in here every Monday, is because I like talking to Kevin, because I feel a connection.
Well, and I can speak to what I've been sort of talking about and what Frank's been mentioning and what Loretta's been mentioning as well. But I can speak more specifically as a fellow animistic spiritual person, a polytheist, at least ostensibly speaking, though our traditions are rather different. When you practice a very small minority faith, an alternative spirituality, that's a difficulty. And concessions are often made. People will join groups that aren't quite their forte and don't really reflect perhaps the tradition that is most consistent with how they see things, so that they can have community. But I think there are compromises. You can have social groups and discussion groups with people of variant faiths that are somewhat similar to what you do. There are interfaith rituals, and in fact, that's actually something that I've been able to engage in a few times, where one person is in a specific tradition and other people will swap, will trade those positions, and nods are given to other traditions in that sort of way, and interfaith paganism. But more importantly, when I was speaking to the idea of having other activities, this is why. This is exactly the reason why, and it's something that I've learned going over 15 years of exploring, polytheistic religions. And I have a wonderful faith in my home, and I'm able to share that through online correspondence and through a handful of friends that I know personally in the real world that practice similar faiths, and even a few a bit further away that practice exactly what I do. Or at least as close as possible. But having other sources of inspiration, looking at it from an almost bardic perspective, and particularly in means of creativity, putting your ideas down, is itself spiritual. So giving yourself as many opportunities as you can to, at the very least, be spiritual outside of the rituals you perform yourself at home, or the few instances you're able to do group ritual or open grove kind of things within pagan communities or pagan pride or something to that effect, the better off you'll be. And a lot of that emptiness that many of us experience on our side of the fence largely comes from that. Because we put such a high expectation on the idea of, for lack of a better word, being like what mainstream religions have afforded to them, that I could walk down the street and have a temple dedicated to my specific alternative spiritual tradition, when logic dictates that it's just not going to happen. You might get lucky and have a small group of people that you meet up with every other Saturday or a few times a month, or you might have some place you can drive a few hundred miles and go to for a specific festival. But we don't have that afforded to us. It sucks, but that's how it is.
I'm actually extremely fortunate in that regard, until basically a random person that I met on Facebook who actually turned out to be a professor of religion and Asian studies steered me to the Danta Society. If I had not happened to run into him, and we have actually become good friends, I'd be the only Hindu I know. I would not have a community. You know, I might possibly hang out at the Durga temple and Lowell for pujas, but outside of that, I would not have a faith community. You know, so you know, the internet is a wonderful thing, I guess.
It's wonderful, and because of how it is, it's with alternative spiritualities, or even just non-Western spiritualities, it's necessary. No matter, at the end of the day, it's necessary to have these sorts of interactions if you want to connect with people who do things differently than what you've been accustomed to and what you've been raised with. That's basically what you have to do. But I think to have a full life, to be able to be spiritual and be fulfilled, even though things are not as good as we dreamed that they could be. The idea of, you know, polytheistic temples on every street corner or something like that, you know, is to have other activities that do motivate and do inspire us spiritually that aren't necessarily religious. And that's why I always mention creativity to everybody. If you have, and a variety of them is good. If you have multiple things that you're creative in, and I would argue that everyone is in some way creative, if they find the right outlet or outlets, that largely helps a lot of those sorts of feelings of frustration and anger and sadness and isolation. And it also bears mentioning that there are many things that we engage in and different hobbies that aren't necessarily creative, but are very much inspired by many of the things that we cultivate spiritually. Case in point, how much fantasy have either of you read, and you see so many of the parallels to you know, pagan, polytheistic, non-Western mythologies. It's replete in almost every single bookstore you could go to, and there are books upon books upon books that take a lot of inspiration from many of the things we do. So I think that is really one of the most important things that you can do for yourself. And obviously be patient, you know. But there was one thing that I wanted to mention to you specifically, Sarah, on the subject of, you know, having to refuse. You know, some of your friends who are Christian who want you to attend this or that or whatever. Yes, saying no isn't polite. But joining their rituals and engaging in that is offensive. Almost blasphemous, because you don't believe in that. So would you rather be mildly impolite or offensive? Or at the very least offensive to yourself and what you know for yourself spiritually to be the case? You have to at some point make a compromise.
This is true. And the way that I quantify it, and the way that I recognize the fact that I need to say no, is I was raised in a largely atheistic household. Like, you did not say God bless you in my house without my dad asking you, why are you saying that? Like, why do you feel the need to say it? And so it's like all of those things. But I remember being in middle school, and I stayed the weekend with a friend of mine, and I didn't even have a concept of what a God was or what a religion was. I knew that people went to church on Sundays. That was the end. I didn't really know what they did and what they talked about, but that was it. And I remember going, and I remember being completely weirded out and freaked out when they all started raising their hands. I mean, it was a non-denominational church, but, you know, they raised their hands, so, you know, like, just exactly, Loretta. Just raising the hands and just being like, yes, like, touch me, Jesus. And I'm just standing around like, what is happening? I don't understand what is going on. What's happening right now? After
I totally get that. That is basically a lot of what frightens me about Pentecostal services.
they weren't even Pentecostal. It was like a non-denominational church. It was just there it was, and
Non-denominational churches a lot of times do have something of a charismatic, what you might call a Pentecostal bent.
what was really weird though, what ended up happening was after that they took me over to what was called prophetic ministry, and they had like 4 people plus my friend and her mom, and they all sat in a circle, and they're like, we're gonna pray over you, and this is what God's telling me, like you're a little lost puppy and he just wants to help you find your way home and all this stuff. And I remember leaving there, and I went home and I was just really confused. Like I didn't know what happened, but I just know that I felt incredibly wrong being in that environment. And I have to like I end up maintaining that. And it's bad because I know that not all churches are like that. I know that, a lot of things that, might be said in a sermon are really good things, and it's, insightful, and there it is. But it's so not my cup of tea.
What has helped me personally over the years, obviously getting over some of the anger that I had when I was an adolescent, going through my own changes and finding things that worked for me on a religious level, was getting to a point and looking at my studies and in broad spectrum, and with that at hand, really taking a look at Christianity and having a healthy sense of ambivalence. I've already concluded long ago that Christianity is irrelevant to me, that it's not true, that it's I don't necessarily think that it's quote-unquote ignorant or wrong in the sense of doing something that shouldn't be done, but I find it entirely inconsistent to me. So to me, it really doesn't matter if a person is Christian. I mean, yes, if they're going about it in a way that is harmful to other people, or if they're trying to attack me with their religion, then absolutely I will defend myself. Though I will do so in a calm and collected manner, as much as I possibly can, though there obviously will be exceptions. We're only human. But when you get to a point when you can just look at it and say, well, it's just not relevant to my life, then there's no guilt. You should not feel shame for not doing that. Even if somebody asks you, even if on some level you think that they mean well, saying no is not a bad thing. You're a very social person, you said that yourself, and you're a very caring person. But sometimes it is possible, Sarah, to be too caring. You need to think about yourself sometimes. That's important, particularly when you're dealing with things that are touchy, like religion.
You really do sound like my therapist.
I think it's because I've seen so many, It rubbed off on me, I guess. I don't know.
That's honest.
How you get that's how you get your experience, by going to therapy.
I'm self-taught.
That's the primary issue. Is I have an anxiety disorder, so it's like one microscopic thing compounds and explodes in my brain, becomes so many different problems. And so it's like, for me to say no, and it's something I'm actively working on. I'm talking to the therapist about it, something I'm actively working on. But it's like to say no, it's like, oh my gosh, they're gonna hate me, and then they won't do this, and they won't do that, and it catapults all the way down the hill.
What I think really helps at the end of the day is to have a place that you feel comfortable. Your home. I was mentioning what I've kind of done from the religious perspective, from a domestic perspective, having a space. And having something that is stable. That's your base. And then from that, building from that, keeping things as simple as possible as your base, what you really need, then getting your wants. And I'm sure I've talked about this with Frank before, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, building from the essentials up. But more than that, building a schedule, building structures around that foundation, having places from which to do things. I think oftentimes what happens with anxiety, I can speak from experience with this, is things become scattered. They're all over the place. And when there isn't something in place where, I sleep in this bed, I don't, go back and forth between the couch. This is where I eat food. I eat at the table. I go here to have this kind of interaction. This is what this group is about, and this is what I might expect from it, but it might also be this. Having those sorts of places that are controlled. Sometimes we often look down upon the idea of compartmentalization from an internal psychological perspective, but having compartments of your life, I think, is valuable. And I've also talked to Frank about this before. There is a concept within psychology called multiple selves theory, and it posits that though you have one single core identity, there are different selves that are manifest in different areas among different people and in different social situations. And it can get rather complicated in the sense that the person you are around a boyfriend, let's say, is different than how you are with your parents. And it's also different if you're around your boyfriend and your parents, if that makes sense. There's different sorts of subtle nuances of your interactions. And knowing that, having a personal inventory, setting the boundaries that you want and that you expect from a scenario allows you to collect yourself, allows you to better be aware of how you experience certain things in certain situations. And this can be as simple as, well, okay, I'm out in public doing volunteering. I'm not just going to throw F-bombs every 5 seconds. I'm not going to make a bunch of meme references because people don't all use the internet like I use the internet. Or maybe not going into a full-on religious discourse in a geek group where the typical conversation is about comic books and video games. Knowing those sorts of boundaries can sometimes be difficult, and it's something that I've had to work on quite a bit over the years. Learning, not just what to talk about and when to talk about it, but how much and levels of intensity. I can be a rather intense person. That's something I've struggled with because when I become too intense and don't realize that, that's where a lot of my anxiety comes from. And honestly, it's okay to take a step back. If you need to go for a smoke break, you need to go get a glass of water, you're feeling a little overwhelmed by a situation, take a step outside. Go around the corner. Go do something else for a second. Just say, I'm going to go to the ladies' room for a moment. And a lot of times that helps you collect yourself, and then you can come back into the situation, into the environment where things are being discussed or there's interactions with a clear head. Clearing your head really helps with anxiety, honestly.
I haven't really had a hard time with that, and I've actually arrived at the conclusion. And I do have an anxiety disorder on top of bipolar type 2. I've come to realize that my anxiety is really, it's not situational, although it will crop up more when I'm in a crowded environment in certain situations. My anxiety is existential. And a lot of the times when it gets bad, really the only thing I can do, and of course I can't do it if I'm out in public, but the anxiety doesn't hit me. I actually haven't had a serious anxiety episode since I moved into my new apartment. But a lot of the times for me, the only thing I can do is get in front of that altar and start chanting divine names. It's about the only thing that'll really calm me down. Or if I am stuck out in public, I just grab my mala and start chanting mantras. But it takes me a while to get down.
There is, though, a difficulty with anxiety. If you find yourself in a situation that there's only a very narrow band of interactions, activities, coping mechanisms that you can use to get yourself out of a situation, it oftentimes makes there to be a greater intensity, a greater level of intensity of the anxieties that you experience when you don't feel safe, when you don't feel grounded and centered, but also a greater level of dependency on that one thing or two or three things that you can do. And having a sort of repertoire of things that you can do in different kinds of situations among different people and with different levels of overwhelming emotions helps you to have a more flexible and more versatile way of dealing with the world. And way of dealing with some of the things that perhaps other people don't experience on the same level that perhaps people like us do. But I do think it's important to realize that pretty much all of the things that we experience like this on these intense levels are experienced on some level by other people. And that's why I think it's important to have a dialogue. A lot of the isolation that we experience through going through a lot of these symptomologies is largely, isolation from other people. Being able to have conversations. One of the greatest things that we have for some of these issues is intimacy. And it doesn't have to necessarily be, erotic intimacy. It can be philia, friendship. Friendship is one of the greatest things we have. It's one of the most instinctual, one of the most fundamental interactions we have with people. And having friends that you can call upon to vent or to talk about an idea or get you back up from the air, floating around and feeling like you're going to fly off the earth, down to being comfortable and taking a seat down and having a hot cup of coffee. The better off you'll be, and the more perspective you have. When you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling overwhelmed, a lot of times it becomes more intense because we lack that perspective. So I just think that's important to bear in mind. Welcome, Amber. So Frank, since you got a little bit of time, I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit of the stuff that I wanted to tell you the other day, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I got really lucky this weekend. My birthday was on Sunday, and I attended the Renaissance Fair on Saturday. It was the second day that I went this year. It's a different fair, smaller, more intimate. I really like the people there. It's a really good environment. And as a side note, a lot of the people that attend the Renaissance Fair are often a part of some of the things that we discuss here in the group. So it's part of the reason why I do feel as comfortable as I do, because I can have these discussions on many of the topics we discuss here, even at the fair. And there's a sense of whimsy, and it's a good escape. It's a nice sort of abnegation from daily life. When I was there, and I think as I've mentioned before, music is probably my main outlet, really. I was able to find a nice frame drum, one of those hand drums that are usually pretty big, and you strike it with your hands on different parts of the face. It was a used one. I got it for about $20. And when I took it home, I realized that there were some flaws in it. It actually needs repair. So I sent it in for repairs. And I don't think it'll be all that expensive, but part of the reason why I'm going through the effort is the drum is actually quite expensive when it's new. So it's a very high quality drum. And I was very excited that I was able to find it randomly. It was one of the ones that I had on my list that I'm trying to collect for my home studio ensemble. And I got really lucky with that. And on Sunday, I went out with my folks. My dad gave me a very generous gift for a gift card, so I was able to buy a few things online. I basically got all of the things that I needed from our setup for the most part. But a really nice thing is I ended up talking to my brother, and him and his wife gifted me a ukulele. So I'm actually going to take the leap and learn a stringed instrument. I've largely avoided it for years because that was my brother's deal. And I sort of convinced myself that because it was his, it was out of reach, that I should never touch it, which is weird, but it touches on something that I kind of think would be interesting in conversation, which I'll segue to once I finish the other part. Basically, what I have and what I'm going to have in my home is a collection of like 4 or 5 different instruments. I have that bass melodica that I showed you a few weeks ago. I'm going to have a frame drum, an alto recorder, a soprano glockenspiel, and a ukulele, and my voice. And I have the recording equipment, I have good programs, and I think it's a nice compromise from the traditional music that I was raised with that's more my roots in music, playing acoustic instruments, and using programs and digital recording techniques to put it together into a song. So I'm very excited for that and where it's going to go. This took a lot less time than it would have taken if I typed this out. So what the segue is
I can't
actually...
imagine, yeah. No,
the segue...
Like, I could just imagine.
Exactly.
Misfire.
Misfire.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. The segue actually has something to do with what I was just mentioning about the whole strength thing, and it somewhat has to do with, it largely has more to do with, that is, psychology, but it definitely does tie in, or could tie into the spiritual topics that are the main focus of chat. So when I was young, first exposure I had to music was piano. My mom played piano. My brother started picking up the guitar around the same time I got into brass. I funneled myself purely into that. And I think it's an observation I've made over the years is something I think is characteristic of when you're growing up. A lot of times when you're forming your identity, you pick things that sort of you identify with, things that sort of shape your own identity through your own activity. You choose activities and pursuits that are most reflective. But as I've become an adult, I've realized oftentimes that that's a limiting factor. You get to a point where there's things you want to explore, you want to expand yourself, and as you expand yourself to what you had as previous boundaries before, you realize that you put yourself in funny little boxes that at a time, and I'm sure you probably heard this sort of dialogue in a typical therapy session, it worked at the time, and it was how you got through things, it was your coping mechanism, but at some point, if you want to progress, if you want to get to a point of more adaptive behaviors, and live a more fulfilled life, you have to break through those boundaries, and you have to get to a point where things are more positive for yourself. And obviously this refers more to the creative aspect, but I think this does very much refer to the whole conversations that we've been having today in chat. It's particularly the case with the more heterodoxical, Gnostic, mystical kind of expressions of the religions we typically discuss here, but also just a more symbolic, mythological, and non-literal, more a deeper understanding of these sorts of spiritual concepts, to be able to challenge yourself and challenge the boundaries and previous preconceptions that you have about things, and be able to take a look at those boundaries that you may have had a few years prior or decades prior. And you've mentioned to me before that a lot of Sufis will oftentimes put themselves out of a point of comfort. They live in a nice area, things are stable, so they'll get to a point where they're like, I should never become too comfortable, so I'm going to change it up. I'm going to move to somewhere different, or I'm going to engage in practices and pursuits that challenge me, and challenge my conceptions, because I don't want to become too cozy with life. And this obviously refers very much to a Gnostic or even ascetic view, but I think it very much correlates to psychology, because a lot of people who are unfulfilled, that you probably see on a regular basis, are stuck in repetition, doing the same thing over and over again, and feeling miserable as a result.
I'll go a step further. I think this is probably some of the functional relations to anxiety, because anxiety, in a sense, kind of tells us something. Something is going on. Something, for me anyway, my personal experience, when I get anxious, is usually something stagnant, something that's actually not moving in a sense. You know, people will think of the opposite, like you gotta keep you're moving too much, and hence, you know, you're causing anxiety. No, it's more about, yeah, you have your space, you have your peace. However, there, like I guess what we talked about, like there's a process to it also. So, and it's funny how you mentioned like it when you were younger and you were establishing your identity in a sense to be not the same, but kind of, this is me, this is who I am, I'm different. And it's funny with me, it actually was quite the opposite. I never felt that I had an identity. I think the identity was actually thrust upon me because of the circumstances. But now, when I got older, it's not that I started forming this identity. I started noticing this identity that I had about myself. There's certain persona about myself that I never actually looked at.
It was aggregative.
So yeah.
It collected together and became more. It became more aware in your consciousness and less of an unconscious factor of identity.
Exactly. So I was always yearning to be by myself because, and in a way, it was kind of weird because it kind of, you know, was in isolation for a little bit, which was not good. But yeah, it's a really difficult thing, and I definitely see how things get. People don't want to stay stagnant, but I really feel a lot of times it's really the anxiety that's telling us something, that little nervousness that's actually telling us something what to do. But the problem is that we don't know how to do them. You know, we have thoughts in our heads, and we want to act upon every thought that we want to act upon. You know, we have every goal, and the visions in our head is not the same thing out there. So it's like art. Art is really funny because you have a vision, you have a concept of what you want to draw, what you want to do, what you want to create. But while you're creating it, it almost comes out to a different picture. Yeah. And I think in a kind of crazy way, that's how kind of life is. You know, you have the goal there. You know, you finished the product, but a lot of times it's not the same thing of what you thought before. But that's the beauty of it, I think. Yeah. So yeah, it sounds very exciting. And there was a period in my life that I hated the word hope, you know. Now I love it because it has so many possibilities. It's not like a very soft hope. It's kind of weird in our culture, and I'm talking about American culture, maybe Western culture. I get the sense that hope is almost like a soft and useless word. It's fuzzy. But through years, I started noticing it's actually a very uplifting and motivating word. You know, being hopeful. It's not just wishy-washy. It's actually it's an intent of something great. You know,
it's active.
I hope I don't get beat up. Yeah, I hope I don't get beat up tomorrow. No, nothing like that. It's like there's so many possibilities there. Hopefully, I'm able to graduate. Hopefully, but during that time, it's language and the way you think about your words, and hence your thoughts, which is part of your language. What does it really mean to you? You know, because our words are associated with something. You know, the way we think about the word love is different for so many people. because they have an association, they have a connection.
Or multiple associations.
To that word, yeah, multiple associations because of their experience. You know, language is not just words; it's really artistic expression. You know, that's what it is.
Symbols.
Yeah, symbols. Yeah. So, and one of the most colorful types of language that I experienced was the spiritual language. Yeah, it really multidimensional things, and I love. And by the way, I love science. Science is. I work with science. I admire methods of science, and I study. I try to study science more, astronomy, biology as much as I can because there's a wonder about it. There's a fascination with it, and I love talking about it. But when it comes to spirituality, it's different. It is something that you actually experience something when somebody's talking about it. You know, not
You
just
don't
with
use a
yourself,
screwdriver to
but
hammer in a nail.
yeah, exactly.
Different
But
tools for different
it's really
experiences.
beautiful.
Absolutely.
Exactly. You know, even though the experience is different, but you're actually experiencing something while it's being told to you. You know, and that's amazing. You know, and trust me, this I'm not trying to promote this community, but I don't promote, but just having people in different faiths in one room and talking about experiences, that's big.
Yeah.
That is really big. I don't think people really realize the extent how important this is. Well, that's basically what I have to say about it.
Well, thank you for that.
Okay, no problem. But yeah, going back to your point, with that's going to be. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it also reflects some of the earlier ideas I talked about with the relationships between strong foundational aspects of your life and challenging boundaries and having different means of expression to find enrichment and cultivation in your life. Speaking specifically with this group, not only focusing on your spiritual life, but seeing other manifestations that do ultimately tie into your spiritual understandings, your ideas about virtues and ethics, and your ideas about what is meaningful and what is important, what is sacred even. But also, I mean, those relationships can be symbolized, like a plant that you have outside, a potted plant. Use that as an example. There's a foundation. It has a root system. It has soil. But even a plant, as is, in a good set of soil, needs to be refertilized. It needs to be trimmed. It needs to be maintained. Obviously, it needs to be watered. It needs sun. But sometimes you need to make accommodations, modifications, and seeing those interrelationships as the plant grows is a part of living life. And I think you were sort of touching on that before with the idea of anxiety, sometimes being motivated more by a lack of knowing what to do about a situation. But I think a lot of times, and this is something I experience a lot through my life, is trying to have everything in nice, neat little boxes. That every single activity and manifestation of my personality needs to directly correlate with one another. They have to make sense, and they have to fit together like puzzle pieces. When quite often our life is a mosaic of different experiences that ultimately are joined in some manner, but are also different. So the word often used, a buzzword to describe this, particularly when you're speaking of spirituality and spiritual relationships, is interconnectedness. Not necessarily unity, which assumes a oneness, which itself can somewhat be denigrating if you're trying to see diversity in people, diversity in cultures, and diversity of systems in their interactions, but rather viewing that they're both joined and separate at the same time. And that's oftentimes difficult for people.
Yeah, I think people are mistaken that unity is not conformity. You know, it's not that.
But like you were saying before, words are symbols,
Mhm.
and they're viewed differently by different
Right.
people.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, there's a lot of people that left.
Laura's going to do puja, and Sarah's always busy, and she usually needs to get her beauty sleep, so she took off a little while ago.
Yeah, she had to go to work.
Yep, or something to that effect.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, she is a teacher.
Well, I
so-
work at. Oh God.
Yeah.
I feel for her. Yeah, I work at night now, so kind of messed my sleeping pattern, but we'll see what happens.
Small correction, to be more specific, Sarah works within the administrative aspect of education, largely helping
she works.
students getting into the correct places they need to be, to getting funding for education, to having the proper resources they need, which itself is actually even more demanding in some ways, because you have to know a lot about the educational system itself, but also dynamics of the educational system. So she is quite busy and has to deal with a lot on a regular basis, and we've had quite a few conversations about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Definitely, it's I'm sure it is a very stressful system.
Paperwork, paperwork, paperwork.
Somebody's got to do it.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, in the future, it won't be necessary. Yes. Hey, Jay does, man. What's up, man? Are you still there?
How you doing, Frank? What's up?
Good. Anything, man? We were talking, or any thoughts about it?
No, not particularly.
No?
Speaking of anxiety, I won't know about my repair for that drum until Saturday. The repair guy's supposed to be on Saturday, and he should give me an estimate. So I'm concerned about price, but I don't think it'll be all that much, and I actually have a bit squared away for it, quite a bit squared away. Though I doubt that it'll be all that much, but I am actually a bit more concerned that it's even possible to repair. I mean, it's not the actual drum face itself is in excellent condition, but the way the edge is coming off like that, I think it slightly bent the edge of the head, and I don't know how you do that, if it'd be extensive. And I'm also a bit impatient. Blinded Sun, it's a frame drum, kind of like a Boran, but a bit narrower and designed to be used with the hands and not with a stick. It's a Meinl 18-inch tunable frame drum.
How much those things, to repair it, how much do you think it's going to cost you?
My guess, based on what it is, I think that it'll probably be, or at least I'm hoping that it'll be between $20 and $40 to repair. And I checked various different sites. It typically retails for $120. So even if it costs twice as much than what I paid for it used to repair, it'll still be worth the investment. But what happened was, when you have this particular kind of drum, it's got the frame and the screws to tighten the drum face to different pitches. Around the edge, the hide is put over the wooden frame. And the way they actually built it on this particular model is they put those, you ever seen those staple gun staples, the thick ones? They have that on the edge, around the whole edge, and there's a small section, about a fifth of the drum face, it actually came off. I don't know if it was because it was sitting in a garage or something, or there might have been condensation or what, but it actually came off the staples, like it separated. So when you look at that part of it, when you peel off the strap, it's apart from it, and it's a bit torn on that edge, on the hide. It's actually a goat skin. It's a really nice goat skin. So I'm not entirely sure, but I'm thinking what he'll probably have to do is reset the head, like try to push it down into place, take the staples out, and either staple it higher or put another strip, like glue an extra strip of hide on top of the frayed ends, so that he has a surface to restaple in the same place. So either move the staples up or move it down. But once again, I don't know about drum repair all that much, so I don't think it'll take long if it's possible. But I'm unsure if the face is not damaged. What happened is, because it came off, that part is a bit depressed. On the drum face next to where the part that's separated, the drum face is slightly depressed. But the actual surface of the whole drum is in excellent condition. It's almost new. So I'm just worried that. So I'm thinking that probably what we need to do is get it back into place and get it restapled somehow, either with a strap or moving the staples up a bit higher, and then tuning it to the highest pitch, so stretching it over the drum and letting it set like that, and maybe wetting it or putting a compound on the goat hide so that it will form flat again. That's what I'm thinking he'd probably have to do, from what I've seen of drums and a few of my friends that work with percussion. But I'm still unsure if that's a feasible thing. I don't know exactly how it works. But this repair guy comes in a few times a month, and he comes in this Saturday, and he's a specialist with drums. He is their drum guy. It's a folk music shop, specifically. I've gone there for quite a few years. So what is your thinking then, Blinded Sun, since you were saying that you do percussion? They are quite literally staples. Like, they're probably about 2 or 3 millimeters thick, and they're the arches, the actual, like, the bar, and then they turn down and point into, and they're actually stapled into the wood over the hide itself to affix it to the frame, and they have them spaced evenly throughout the whole face. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 30 staples. The head is not damaged. I thoroughly inspected it. What it seems to be is, because it came off the head, that part of the drum is depressed, and the hex screws, since it can't properly pull it, they don't thread in. Because when I actually try to thread them in, they don't. He might have to do a little bit with the hex screws, perhaps because of what happened or might have happened to it. But what it seems is, if it was just put back into place properly and was able to pull and actually get into tune, that there would be no issues with the screws or anything like that. But I'm not certain. So he'll let me know on Saturday. Okay, Frank, see you in a bit. Yeah, it doesn't sound serious. It just sounds like a small repair. Is it a thing where they might actually do like a patch to the edge of the hide with maybe, because I know a few crafters who actually use animal skin glues to glue together hides to make weapons and bags and things like that. Um, or would they just move the staples to a part that's not frayed? Um, I'm just wondering how they would actually go about that. But it is specialty because frame drums are not necessarily as common. If you were to take okay, hold on. Like you said, I'm not. You're not sure? Is that what you meant to say? Yeah. You're not familiar with that type of drum. Okay. Like I said, I don't think it'll be that much, and like I said, I have a check coming in the mail the next few days. So, and they'll give me time anyway, even if I didn't. I know them pretty well, and their policy is that they give you pretty much as much time as you want. You can pay. I think you actually have to pay a small down payment, but like I said, I doubt it'll be at most more than 60. I don't even think it's that much. To me, it just seems like a pretty simple repair, because there's no damage really to the head. So once again, I don't know repair like protocol, or if I don't know. It's a little thing with me. Sometimes I get a little impatient and a bit nervous about things when I do something. But it was such a great deal, like I said, and it's so beautiful. The wood is in perfect condition. The hide is really, really good. It's actual goat skin. So putting in the time and energy to get it fixed would have been better than buying a synthetic that's pre-tuned and doesn't have the capability or the sound quality that this thing has. Cost of that it would be retail, or the cost that I spent on it, or what? I spent $20. It was an instrument that he had in his garage, and he was just selling it off. He had no use for it anymore. So, and he insinuated that it needed repair. So I knew that going into it. It's a fixer-upper, buying used. So, but it's better than spending $120 or $130 on a new one that I don't have. Because I'm trying to collect instruments, and I already had ones on the docket that I was trying to get and getting. So I don't have a lot, But there again, I don't expect a lot. It's not the kind of arrangement I'd be trying to make where I would need super expensive anyway. Wow. Yeah, fair enough. But everything else is new. Everything else I have is great. So, um, that was one of the ones that I really wanted to foundation, because most of everything I've played over the years has been some kind of keyed or valved wind or keyboard instrument. So obviously I wanted to learn some kind of string, and ukulele interests me, and I wanted to learn percussion, and I really liked the versatility and simplicity of a frame drum, and it's also culturally widespread. Every culture has used one at some point. No problems. I'll reiterate. So I have something called a melodica, and it's in the bass range. It's a Suzuki B24, and I really like melodicas. It's actually my favorite. It's got a lot of versatility and expression, and it's a blow piano basically. And there's only one that they make. I think Hammond used to make one, but it was like really, really expensive. And I got it for super cheap on some kind of crazy clearance like last year. So I got that. I'm getting a recorder, ukulele, glockenspiel. And I also have my voice, and I'll have the frame drum. So I'll have 5 instruments and my voice. Most of those instruments I can play pretty well, save for the strings and percussion, which would be the new ones for me. Yeah, basically. What I'd be doing is making an ensemble. I'd be recording each instrument independently and porting WAV files into a digital audio workstation, and then doing mixing, EQ, reverb, everything, and even cutting and pasting, layering, pretty much anything I'd want. The one I got is actually the Yamaha Alto recorder. It's a Baroque fingering model. It was a really nice one. It was very highly rated. So I like the Alto range of recorders. I think it has a better sound. And the ensemble, I want there to be a good range of different pitches. So my voice typically is between baritone and tenor. So alto would be just above that, and I'd have 2 soprano instruments and 2 instruments, including the drum, that would be in the bass register. So. Welcome back. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I definitely think it's a good deal, and I like that kind of music. So I think it's pretty versatile, and I could pretty much create songs however I want using that. It's a decent setup. So piano when I was in grade school, trumpet in middle school, and tuba when I was in high school. Played keyboards on and off for years. Never really picked up brass again because it's just impractical. Though I do have my, I got my my trumpet repaired and converted into raw brass for sentimental value. I clean it regularly to keep it in condition. It's the first instrument that was actually mine. So, and it's also just in case at any given point somehow I manage that a sound studio appears out of thin air and I'm able to practice it somehow. And I do have books on it if I somehow was able to make it feasible, but I doubt it. It's just too loud. It's just too loud to put into anything. There's just no way of really putting it in anything. Brass was what I was best at when I was younger. I was very good with the tuba. So, and that's actually part of the reason why I got the bass melodica, because I'm great with keys and I'm great with the kind of woodwind aspect, and I love the bass register, and it sort of fits that, and it's not that expensive. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I think so too. I have a good flexibility in my wrists, and I'm very good with the tapping motions that are required, particularly for the hand drum. So for the frame drum. Like I said, I just got to make sure. If I get the estimate on Saturday, he'll probably start working on it that day, though there's a festival in the area where that folk center is. So most likely he'll probably start on Sunday. And if it's a quick fix, he'll probably be done with it. They're closed on Monday, so I'll probably have it on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. Though it could take as late as Thursday or Friday. But I doubt it's extensive. I don't even think he'd really have to order anything. He probably has pretty much everything he'd need. The staples are in perfect condition. They're just, they came the high came off the staples. So I think he has everything he needs there. It might be a measure of reconditioning the head though. But I've talked to a bunch of people and read a few tutorials, and a lot of that is just coating it with water and stretching it out where it needs to be and letting it set once you reset the head. So we'll see. So what do you play? You were talking about drum set, so I'm assuming drummer. Got it. And Do you mainly play? Okay, so guitar, piano, drum set. So pretty much, if you had the instruments on you, you could pretty much. Yep. Yep. I use an independent digital audio workstation. I'll write it in. It's modest, and I don't have a lot of money, so it's very inexpensive to renew the certification. So I like how it works. The workflow is very similar to what you mentioned. Does what I need it to. I have all free effects, so. And I like supporting smaller companies, so. Well, my thing is, I could, if I want to, get that, and I technically do, but I have certain standards that prevent me from using things in an illegitimate manner. And the thing is with that, yeah, I could get it, but half the things that are on the list of other plugins I would have to pay for anyway. So it's like I don't have the money for the real thing and would get it illegitimately, but I wouldn't have money to buy any of the other plugins otherwise. So I might as well become accustomed to using something less expensive and that requires you to do more things manually and use more free plugins and take more time and learn how to do that than I would, cheating the system. And I'm not doing it professionally, so I don't really need it anyway. So, no point. But that's me. Other people want to do it, for sure. Yeah, I know. They put a lot of work into it, and they put a lot of work into it for people who do it professionally. So, there again, this is something that I think is way too damn expensive, and I can almost kind of see why people download it illegally. Though there are smaller packages you can buy, and there are other programs that do the same thing. So. Doesn't even bear mentioning. I think everyone kind of knows if I'm talking about digital art, like physical art, the program that's ungodly expensive. Yeah, so for you, those of you listening. Yeah, exactly. Like I said, there are other options. I mean, pretty much anything you at some point have to pay for it. It was good speaking to you too as well, Frank. Take care of yourself. There are other things available to you if you're patient. So, yeah, I think you might like it. It's pretty solid. It's 60 to start for a year, and then 20 to renew every year on time. 25 if you're past the renew date, and 35 if you're a little bit further past it. And you get all free updates for every year that you renew. So that's basically what you're paying for is updates. You can still use it if you're a little late. You can keep using it continually. You just won't get updates. So any bug releases or anything you won't be protected for. That's like it with every single other one in that price range. They're all like that. They all require you to buy a license. And there's for good reason. You're supporting development and making sure that it runs properly. And do you know about Osseo for All? Good. That is a lifesaver, particularly for people like me who have a very modest system. It makes it so that you can actually run samples properly without, blowing up your system. So. Interesting. Did it have to do with compatibilities with the DAW or some kind of weird conflict and it was resolved with an update? Yep, that's always what it is. There are limitations to sound cards, unfortunately. But I usually just adjust the samples and just do the best that I can. And you can compartmentalize your workflow so you can run different things. And oftentimes you can find shortcuts, different things. So you might have to record something in a different program entirely and then port it. Like you can port things. If you port things as a WAV file, they tend to be much less sample intensive. So that's basically how I would do instruments and vocals. But there are conflicts that you'll notice, like certain plugins, and it just depends. They won't allow you to do duplicates. So like, say you have 3 tracks and you want to use the same plugin, sometimes it won't let you do it. Or the same, well, not usually plugins, usually the same, like it was, because when I was trying synth, I was just trying out a bunch of stuff, and it won't let you do certain instruments, like virtual instruments, VSTs. Like if you try to run like the same virtual instrument 3 times, one in one of 3 in each of 3 tracks, sometimes it will stop. It won't allow it. It doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it does. Like Synth 1, which is a free one, that you can use that as many times as you want. It doesn't do anything. There's no conflict. But some of the higher end